Hey there, welcome to Coding with Drew. This is the JavaScript Masterclass. I'm your instructor, Drew Carricker, and I'm a professional DevOps engineer and web developer. This course is all about JavaScript. Prerequisites. What do you need to know before starting this course? This course assumes that you know HTML and CSS. If you don't know it, be sure to check out the Coding Basics course on codingwithdrew.com for everything that you need to know in order to be prepared for this course. I also recommend the Bash course, so that way you already have a framework for a language in your toolbox to mentally map how a programming language should work. Bash is one of my favorite languages. It's very easy to wrap your head around. It's very easy to read, and it doesn't care about spacing like other languages do. It also makes logic and loops very simple. So how does JavaScript make web pages alive? There's 4 steps, really. JavaScript makes web pages more interactive by accessing and modifying the content and markup used in the web page while it's being viewed in a browser. You can use JavaScript to select any element, attribute, or text from an HTML page. For example, you can select the text inside of an H1 element on a page. You can select any elements that have a class attribute with a value of example, and you could find out what was entered into a text input whose ID attribute has a value of email. After we've selected our content, then we want to modify our content. You can use JavaScript to add elements, attributes, and text to the page or remove them. For example, you can add a paragraph of text after an H1 element. You can change the value of class attributes to trigger new CSS rules for those elements. You can change the size or position of an image element. 3. Program rules. You can specify a set of steps for the browser to follow, much like a recipe or a manual, which allows it to access or change the content of the page. For example, a gallery script would check which image a user clicked on and display a larger version of that image. A mortgage calculator could collect values from a form and then perform a calculation and display repayments. An animation could check the dimensions of the browser window and move an image to the bottom of the viewable area, also known as the viewport. JavaScript encompasses many of the traditional rules of programming. It can make a web page feel interactive by responding to what the user codes, which brings us to the 4th step, react to events. You can specify that scripts should run when a specific event has occurred. For example, it could be ran when a button is pressed, a link is clicked, a cursor hovers over an element, information is added to a form, an interval of time has passed, a web page has finished loading, and much more. Understanding some basic programming concepts and the terms that JavaScript programmers use to describe them is going to be especially important. Like all other languages, you need to know its vocabulary and structure facts. It will become with how it's applied by looking at examples and how it's commonly used today will help you in your career. We're going to build 10 projects throughout this course. Just to recap a couple items and clarify some terms, we're going to look at this HTML markup here. And in this markup, we see an H1. It's got a class with a value of example, and then there's content and a closing tag. And the class is called an attribute name, and the actual value is called an attribute value. CSS is very similar in that it has a selector and a declaration. The same selectors that you use for CSS, you can use for JavaScript. That covers and concludes our initial introduction and recap for JavaScript. I look forward to seeing you in future videos.